All right. Well, hello everyone, and it's great to see you all back here for our second local road safety plan task force meeting for the city of Lafayette. I want to thank you all for making the time, and also I want to welcome a few of you here today who were not able to join the first task force meeting last month. The project team has been busy since our last meeting, and so today we'll dive a bit more into the meat of the safety plan with a discussion of the results of a detailed crash analysis for Lafayette. And that draft report was included in your agenda packet, if you didn't notice it. But we're also wanting to hear from you today as we develop our list of priority safety locations. And so we're leaving lots of time during the meeting to engage with you all in a really good discussion about your experiences, your thoughts, and your knowledge of our city streets. So each of you brings a very unique perspective to this task force, and so I'm hoping that you're all willing to share your expertise with the project team about specific locations across Lafayette that you may consider to be unsafe or particularly safe. And this is a really important input into the plan. So with that started, I'll just jump into our agenda so we can get started. And the next item is roll call and reintroduction of task force members. And so to make this easy, why don't I just go down the list of task force members, and when I call your first name, if you could just state your full name and your affiliation to the task force, if you don't mind. Teresa.
Teresa Geringer, and my affiliation is liaison from the Lafayette City Council. Thank you.
Susan.
Susan Kendall, same liaison from City Council.
Mike.
Mike Moran, representing the City of Lafayette Engineering and Public Works.
Greg Brown.
Hi, Greg Brown from the Lafayette Transportation and Circulation Commission.
Colin.
Colin Clark with the Contra Costa Transportation Authority and Countywide Vision Zero.
Greg Barnes. I thought I saw your name. Okay, not here yet. Tommy. Also not here. Ben.
Ben Aldred, Police Chief, Lafayette Police Department.
Thanks and welcome. Chris.
Chris Bachman, one of the assistant chiefs with Contra Costa County Fire and also the fire marshal representing Contra Costa County Fire.
Great, glad you're here. Kirsten.
Kirsten Riker, 511 Contra Costa and Street Smarts Diablo, the Safe Routes to School program.
Luz.
Luz is not present, but I am. Emily Worming.
Okay. You're next on the list, so.
Okay, Emily Worming, Contra Costa Health Services in the Public Health Division.
And Katie from Santos from Chamber of Commerce is also not here.
No, I actually am here.
Oh, you're here. Hi.
For a minute, yes.
Okay.
The quiet room.
I thought I got word that you weren't able to make it. I'm glad you're here. Mark.
Mark Drager, I'm one of our two at-large members.
And Jennifer.
Jennifer Paul, the other member.
And we also have our consulting team here as well from Tool Design. And so I'd like to have you introduce yourself, Diane.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. My name is Diane Zhao. I am the new consultant project manager with Tool Design. I will give a little bit more introduction when we get to our PowerPoint, but I just want to kind of pop in and say hi.
And Lauren.
I'm Lauren Pepe. I'm the Deputy Project Manager for this project.
Right, and then we will have Sarah Abel joining us in a little bit. She is the principal in charge at Tool Design. So thanks, everyone. The next item on the agenda is adoption of the agenda. And so just wondering if someone is willing to...
I move adoption. No,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
I'll do second.
We might have practiced at that. The rest of you, it'll come to you.
Agenda number 4 are public comments for items not on the agenda, but within the purview of the task force. I am not seeing anyone with their hands up. Virtual hands up. Old business. So approving the summary minutes from task force meeting number 1, which we are actually going to go through the recap and then also the updated goals and objectives. Great. Would someone like to move to approve the summary minutes?
So moved.
Seconded.
Second.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to new business then. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Diane.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Does everyone see my screen? It should say Lafayette Local Road Safety Plan Task Force Meeting number 2. I'm assuming that's a yes. No one has said no.
Yes.
Okay,
It's good.
cool.
Thank you, Diane. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for the introduction and the welcome. I kind of wanted to just give a little bit more detail. Brian, who presented during the first task force meeting, have moved on to bigger and better things, but I promise you're in good hand. And then just giving you a little bit more description of me. I support most of the safety initiative here in West Coast for 2 Design, including local road safety plan, Vision Zero action plan, and school and safety programs. I am currently managing a local road safety plan update in Hermosa Beach. And I work closely with Lauren. Patrick mentioned earlier, Sarah Abel will be joining around 4:15. So if you see her pop in, I just want to give you a heads up. She will be joining. And then, yeah, welcome and thank you for everyone who is joining us today. I have people who are joining us for the first time underlined. So just thank you for kind of taking your time out to come to this meeting. And for today's agenda, we're going to start off by talking about the updated goals and objective, and Lauren will be going over modification that was based off of discussion during the first task force meeting. I'll be going over a summarized version of the crash analysis finding, and then pausing for anyone with any questions, and then going over the priority locations. And this is the area we really want to focus on today and get feedback from the task force on some of the initial priority locations we have identified, and then additional locations that stands out to this group. And then we'll end with a brief discussion on upcoming field visit and review of upcoming public engagement activities. And then just as formality, I'll go over some of the meeting norms and agreements for the task force meeting. So the meeting will be recorded and made available to the public. These will be virtual, and we encourage you to use your camera, but it's not required. Please use the raise hand function if you have questions. And speak your truth and recognize other people's truth for them. We want to have an open conversation during these meetings, and give everyone a chance to participate equally, but try not to dominate or overpower others. Listen as an ally, and our objective here is work together to create a safer community. And lastly, ask for clarification if you don't understand anything. So I'm gonna kick it off or hand it over to Lauren.
Thank you, Diane. Next slide, please. So I'm going to present all of the goals and objectives we talked about last time. I've updated everything to account for the discussion we had at the last meeting. So basically for each goal and objective, I'll just kind of go over the main ideas, what has been changed since last time. So the goal will be written in red, and then the track changes are the underlined portions. So for goal 1, I rewarded it to make it more about people's safety. So, change traffic safety to safety of roadway users. I also included educational materials in the second objective. And in the third objective, added in pop-up events and launching the online survey to kind of fill out all of the outreach objectives that we will be doing. And for goal 2, so here we emphasized virtual communication. So calling out that we will be using social media as well as other virtual channels like our web map, which we do talk about in another one of these goals. And then also added in businesses to the second objective. So goal 3, this was rewarded so that it was clear that we're taking a proactive approach, not just a reactive approach. So called out looking at near misses, locations that feel unsafe, locations with risk factors, and kind of highlighted that's where the public and our stakeholders come in to help us identify those locations. And yeah, again, so just kind of called out the public in a few of these in the goal itself as well as objective 3. For goal 4, here is where we changed the term countermeasures, since it was pointed out that that was kind of counterintuitive. We changed that to actions, so traffic safety actions. So change that throughout. Also removed the term low cost, since that's a subjective term, and replaced that with effective short term. And yep, that is all on this goal. And for goal 5, so we added a new objective to the end to increase the number of people walking, rolling, and biking in Lafayette. And then we also wanted to call attention to the fact that one of the objectives here of creating this plan is to make Lafayette competitive for grant funding. So yeah, any questions, anything to discuss?
If not, I'll move on to the crash analysis finding portion. Thank you, Lauren, for that. To recap from the first task force meeting, the study period between 2017 and 2021, there were 408 total crashes within Lafayette. Many of these occurred during California 24, but these crashes will be excluded from this analysis as the safety plan is focusing on local road improvements. We'll be focusing on the 47 crashes with 14 fatal and serious crashes along local road. And many of these crashes we're seeing are concentrated on busier street. And when we're looking at crash type and crash involving only motor vehicle, that accounts for a majority of the share of crashes with 57%. However, when we look at fatal and serious injury, bicyclists, pedestrians, and motorcyclists are much more vulnerable for fatal and serious injury outcome, with 2/3 of the bicyclist crashes resulting in fatal or serious injury outcome, KSI. The next 3 slides I have will summarize the crash analysis findings, trend, and key takeaway. And for the crashes in Lafayette, we're seeing most fatal and serious injury crashes occurring at intersection, particularly at unsignalized intersections. Streets with higher functional classifications, such as major or arterial streets, have higher rate compared to quieter streets like residential or local streets. These streets are generally wider with higher vehicle volumes. And then lastly, streets with higher posted speed limit, more in particular 35 miles per hour, accounts for the largest share of crashes and largest share of fatal and serious injury crashes. Most of the crashes we're seeing are occurring during late daylight condition, which is to be expected as most most trip occur during the daytime. And then also crashes with only one party is the most frequent, with majority of crashes striking a hit object for motor vehicle collisions. Perpendicular is the second most common crash type between motor vehicles, which typically involves a motor vehicle turning left and then another one proceeding straight, or both vehicles proceeding straight. And then in terms of who is involved or who is affected by these crashes, in general, young people are more affected by crashes at a much higher rate, especially the age group 20 to 24, with older adults more likely to result in a fatal or serious injury than other age category. I'm happy to talk about these data a little bit more. So I have the next few slides I have are slides that are pulled from the crash analysis report, and I'm going to run through them, but feel free to stop me if you want us to pause and look at it. But it is a good amount of slides, and I didn't want this meeting to be majority looking at tables from the crash analysis report, but feel free to holler. So this is a crash table on crash location types. The functional classifications, the posted speed limits, the lighting conditions, the crash types, movement types.
Diane, could I interrupt and ask a question?
Yep.
So the report and also these slides show the last two columns, the total EPDO, and I'm just wondering if you can talk about the relevance of that.
The EPDO is basically a weighted calculation we do, and that takes in fatal and serious injury and weighted at a higher value. So when we're looking at crashes, corridors that has fatal or serious injury are rated higher compared to the other crash types. And this is a great way to look at crashes in the sense that for a corridor that has a lot of crashes but has lower amount of fatal and serious injury, they don't get rated as high as a corridor that has fewer crashes but more severe crashes. So it really allows us to target the corridors and the areas that have more severe fatal crashes first, and working towards the goal of eliminating zero traffic deaths. Do we have any other questions before we move on? Oh, Jennifer, I see your hand up.
Yeah. Do you have any of the data that teases out for the killed and separate from serious injured? Because we have had 5 deaths in the last 5 years, 6 if we go back to 2014. So that's always seemed very high to me. So I just was wondering why we lump that together.
We can look at it separate, but we typically lump that together because that's our first area we want to target, fatal and serious injury. But we could separate that out and look at that a little bit separately when we get into the crash causation, the emphasis area part of this project.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. And then the next slide I have, it's kind of the breakdown on victim ages. And this is done so we're comparing the percentage of victim versus the percentage of population within Lafayette. And then here we could really see the age group 20 to 24 make up of 24% of KSI victims, but it's only 3% of the population within Lafayette. And then, do we have any other?
I have a question. Yeah. Is that typical?
This So I think when we look at national statistics, it's very typical. This is helpful when we look at national statistics and see who are involved in crashes. I think in general, younger drivers, it's usually a target area, an emphasis area when we look at other local road safety plan in the more reckless driving. So I think this is pretty typical.
Okay, thanks.
Katie?
Forgive me if I miss this, it's noisy behind me. So these are the victims. Are they, for lack of a better word, the perpetrators, or is this solo? Like, is this a 20-year-old hitting another 20-year-old or a 70-year-old hitting a 20-year-old?
So we can tell that just from looking at this table right now. That's like another analysis we need to do to look at who is causing the crashes, but this table only shows the victim that is involved in the crashes. And Colin, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, similar question was whether or not you're going to have similar analysis for the drivers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's something we want to look at when we look at the causation and the emphasis area, and that will help us dictate the type of messaging we want to have when we think about safety actions later part of this plan in terms of whether we want to recommend messaging around younger groups, but this table only shows victims, and I kind of want to like emphasize that this is just a victim age group. And Gregory Brown?
Hey, thanks. I just want to clarify on this chart, this looks like it's all crashes, including both 24 and non-24. Is that correct? Because it's a lot higher victims, and it appears accidents than most of the other tables in the report.
Yeah, I believe, sorry, I believe this does look at all of the crashes within Lafayette, but I would have to double check that and get back to you on it.
Okay, thank you.
And Colin?
Just a quick question in terms of, or I guess suggestion, if there is an effort into looking at the demographics of drivers or those causing the collisions, if whether or not you'll be able to access data for whether or not it's a repeat offender or not.
I don't think we have access to that information as of yet. I think that actually would be a really great question for Chief Ben, if that's something we record, if there's a database for, but not that I know of for Lafayette. And maybe Patrick, you know if we have that information?
I don't know. I don't know. No.
I apologize. Could you repeat the question? I had radio traffic in the background.
Oh, sorry. No, totally fine. I was asking, Colin brought up a great point of when we look at crashes based off who's causing the crashes, would we be able to see, or if there's a database on who, if it's a repeat offender, and if that's something that you have in terms of a database?
So I don't have a database for that. Based on all my years of traffic enforcement, investigating traffic accidents, both here and in Danville, a repeat offender is very unlikely if you're looking at a 4 to 5 year time frame. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it's definitely an unusual factor to have that come up. Typically, people that may be repeat offenders, typically they're coming on our radar and they're getting sent to DMV for a reevaluation of their driver's license. Folks that maybe should not have a license anymore. So some of those folks that would be potential reoffenders based on other issues, when we do encounter them, we do send them to DMV for a reevaluation of their driver's license.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay. And do we have any other questions?
I have a question. Maybe it's coming up in the slideshow, but you went by some of those other ones pretty quickly. But are we going to talk about causes in terms of like DUI percentages and stuff like that? Is that coming up still?
So the goal of these presentation and the crash analysis for us is to kind of show the trend and key takeaway and seeing what type of crashes are happening in Lafayette. We do have another task item after the priority location to look at the emphasis area and crash causation, and that's where we'll kind of dive deeper into these crashes and what is the crash causations for Lafayette. So we will, and the idea of the crash analysis is to kind of do a general crash analysis and then to do the key trend of these crashes. But we will look at the causation at a later point.
Great, thanks.
Diane, it is included in your draft report, correct, or draft memo causation?
There's some high-level crash causation. I think one of them being speeding is mentioned a few times, but I think it's not a whole story on like what are the causation. And I say that because I think a lot of what we want to do, especially with the priority location, is to go out in the field and then also seeing the corridors that are identified as part of the priority location, what are the similarities between the corridors to kind of tell a fuller story on the emphasis area and then the causation. So there is some identified in the memo, such as speeding, and I believe left turn vehicle, but I want to preface that's a small portion of the story. And if we don't have any other questions, but feel free to stop me if we do, I would like to move on to the priority location discussion and kind of talk about how we identify the priority location based off the crash information we just discussed. So for this portion, we employed a statistical tool called Safer Street Priority Finder, which uses two methods. The first one uses a sliding window analysis, which purely takes into account historical crash data. And this method measures linear crash density along every street and help us understand which street has higher density on a per mile basis. And I like to think of this as in there's a half-mile window that's taking a tenth of a step, and every step is taking is capturing the crashes within that window. And that's all based on historical crash information. And the second method we also look at is through a safer street model, which is used to estimate future crash risks. Okay. And the Safer Street model looks at historical crash information, but in addition, it also looks at predictive elements or estimated elements based off roadway characteristics, demographic, and national crash rate to generate corridors with highest estimated risks. The Safer Street model is only for pedestrian and bicyclist crash and currently does not predict estimated crash risk for motor vehicles. So here we have three different maps, and these are generated based off the sliding window analysis for bicyclists, pedestrian, and motor vehicles. So for pedestrian, the sliding window analysis highlights Olympic Boulevard and Pleasant Hill Road as the area with highest density of mount crashes. And then for pedestrian, the sliding window analysis indicate Moraga Road and also Mount Diablo Boulevard as highest crash density. Downtown Lafayette runs along Mount Diablo Boulevard, and several businesses run along Moraga Road, which makes it a heavy travel route for pedestrians. And then for motor vehicle crashes, we're seeing Pleasant Hill Road as the portion that's being highlighted. And this road has some sections that are generally wide at intersection with raised median and 2 turn lanes and posted speeds between 35 to 40 miles per hour. So we are seeing Pleasant Hill Road has a number of speed-related crashes. And this corridor also connects to California 24 and serves as a regional connection. And now using the Safer Street model, we were able to estimate crash risks for bicyclists and pedestrian. Similar to the sliding window analysis, actually, we're seeing Olympic Boulevard and Pleasant Hill Road in addition to portions of Mount Diablo Boulevard showing up as a segment with highest crash risk for bicyclists. And then for pedestrians, we're seeing Moraga Road being the highest risk for pedestrian crashes. And for pedestrian, we're not seeing the same level of hotspots because there are fewer crashes for pedestrian, but the model does show a more concentrated corridor. Using the methods.
Hi, can I have a quick, can I go back to that one? The plots that you're showing here don't match the ones I have in mind. Is that right? Did you guys update these?
No, I think they should match the one in the report.
No. Because I'm on page like 33 and 34. It's 23 of the actual document. And I had a question on this because there's these little yellow circles, and and on yours you have it on. I mean, you know, little not triangles, little diamonds, and that says schools. And my legends don't have that on it, even though the schools are showing up in the right places. So it would be great if we could get.
Yeah,
so ours are different colors. Yeah.
So there are 5 total maps for that are shared. So the first 3 maps is based off of the historical crash information, and yeah, I agree. We'll add in.
See. Okay, so what are the first ones then? So the first ones then are.
Yeah, so
what's the difference between them?
Yeah, so the one that are showing here right now are based off historical crash information, and we do this based off a sliding window analysis where we capture historical crashes for bicyclists, pedestrian, and motor vehicle modes. And I agree with you. We'll add in the key for schools because I don't see it here. So I'll make a note of
so
that.
These are them.
Yeah,
right. Sure. Okay. And then what's the difference between the blue plots that you were showing us then?
And then the blue plot uses a different type of, a different model that was developed part by tool, but it also looks at historical crash information in addition to roadway characteristics and demographic information such as census tract to then give a prediction of crash risks on corridors that currently don't see or might not have crashes, but because the roadway characteristics or the census tract and demographic matches location that has historical crash information, it would highlight certain corridor as a corridor with potential estimated risk. So it's a more proactive approach in looking at crash analysis, and it should always be looked at along with this historical crash map that we're showing here.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And Jennifer?
Yeah, so yeah, I have two questions. One, and you may have just answered it. So like I'm looking at Pleasant Hill, for instance. It doesn't have any crashes per se marked by the dots, but it shows it as a red line. So you're saying that's predictive?
So the red line is historic. So sorry, let me just explain again. There are 3 different mode types. So there isn't, each one of them focus on based off the mode. So if it doesn't show on Pleasant Hill Road, for example, the pedestrian crash figure, there is just no pedestrian crash along Pleasant Hill Road. So it doesn't show it as a marked right now, but it's really heavily, I guess, it's red in the motor vehicle crash figure, and that's all based off historical crashes for these 3 figures.
And my second question is, all of this data, I mean, because I read the report, but all of the data is known data in terms of things to have actually occurred versus we've never done near misses. Up to this point, none of this information is that's what we're kind of going to try and gather, is all of the anecdotal near misses that we haven't captured in the past. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what we're looking here is all historical crash information. That's the colors and the crash risk is generated from the historical crash information. And then the second portion with the map with the blue line aims at a more proactive approach by looking at historical crash information in addition to roadway types and then census tract or demographics to predict or estimate crash risks along certain routes. So it doesn't necessarily capture the whole picture of near misses because this is all based off like roadway information and then census tract information. And I think part of our discussion today is to also get feedback from the task force on more information such as the near miss crashes or corridors that doesn't show historical crash information, but people who live in Lafayette know to their heart like what are these like high risk corridors.
And I just wanted to add, Diane, on top of that, we just kicked off, and we're going to talk about it later, a survey, an online survey, and that's the opportunity for members of the public to identify locations where they either feel safe or unsafe, and then are able to provide comment. So that component will come through different means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Mark?
I'll keep it brief because I'm sure you'd like to move forward. But if you could go back to the previous slide, one thing that I always think of when I look at maps or just data of collisions where they're happening is, what are the streets where it's so uncomfortable, it feels so unsafe that we're not necessarily seeing collisions, but that's because people aren't walking there or they aren't biking there, at least as much as on other streets. And so one example that comes to mind is, we're looking at the bike map, we see Mount Diablo north of the reservoir, and it doesn't pop up as a street seeing high crash density. But if we look at the next set of maps, the predictive model is popping that out as a street of significance. High speed street, very basic, narrow, unprotected bike lanes that probably most people on this call would not feel comfortable riding on or sending their families on. So especially for a city as ours, where we have far too many collisions, but maybe not enough to really just look at the collisions as some larger cities might. Drawing your eye between these two maps, I think is instructive. Only other question I have, and we perhaps can get to this, is that folks will submit action requests, transportation action requests, and I forget if this was discussed, if we can use that as an input for some of these near misses, things that people are seeing on the streets.
And is the action request part of something that the city maintains, or is?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah. There are requests that come into the engineering department for either just complaints or with specific requests for crosswalks or traffic calming or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Do you have any other comments or questions?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
So in the predictive maps, you only have the two maps. You've got bike and ped, but not cars.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Yeah, so the predictive map, it's using a software called Safer Street Model, which it only looks at the estimated crash risk for bicyclists and pedestrians. So it's just the limitation of the software we're using.
Okay, so all right, so that's why, because Pleasant Hill Road had a ton of motor vehicles and motorcycle accidents, and it's not showing up as dark on either of these, and that's what I was kind of surprised at. Okay, all right.
Yeah, so using the method we talked about, we came up with, we put together a list of our top priority location that we think needs particular attention in Lafayette, and this is based off the highest crash density historically, and then the estimated crash risk. We're hoping to build off the task force knowledge today in addition to community feedback that Patrick mentioned, to refine this list. But I would love for us to kind of get a gut check from the task force on the list we have, which is Diablo, Pleasant Hill Road, Olympic Boulevard, and Moraga Road, and see if this reflects your experience walking, biking, and just moving around Lafayette.
And those are definitely the top four, I would imagine. Yeah. Would you include School Street, Moraga Road, and can you bundle School Street on there?
Yeah, yeah. So Moraga Road is definitely a pretty high list of corridors from what we're seeing, especially from Mount Diablo and in front of Lafayette Elementary School. So we're definitely thinking of that closely as part of this location list. I think like my question right now for these lists we have is the limits or the corridors we have the limits we want to view, or should we narrow the corridors? Should it be from Old Tunnel Road to Olympic Boulevard? Are these the right corridors or streets we're looking at? And I see a lot of hands raised up, so this is great. Mike?
Yeah, so just a comment that, I agree with these locations. If you look at the 47 accidents, you'll see that they're scattered all over the city. There isn't a concentration of 10 of them in one tight, frame of land. But then also, and I'm not as familiar with the serious injury accidents, but unfortunately I know of all the fatalities, and, it includes Moraga Road, and it includes Olympic at the roundabout. So they're covered there. But, the other locations are, Reilly's Valley Road, El Nido Ranch Road, Marywood, and School Street. So none of those are covered, but my comment is just, well, 2 of those are near a school, and but also that these can happen everywhere or anywhere. So, I'm not seeing a lot of consistency in that regard. So it's more just a general comment that, this would cover 2 of our 6 fatalities, but it wouldn't cover anywhere near all of them. And if you tried to cover those, you'd maybe even be surprised, why did it happen here? So just a comment.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I do want to speak on the second point you made, which is you mentioned a few of the local roads that are not covered here, but then you also mentioned that a lot of the crashes are not happening at concentrated area. And I think when we start talking about the emphasis area and causation, I think this would be a really good portion to kind of look at between these high level or these priority locations, what are the elements or causation or emphasis area that are common between these priority location and where crash is happening, to do a more proactive recommendation and like actions for the city. So we talked about earlier speed being a factor. So does that mean we want to look at streets that have higher speed to target that area, but even if it doesn't have crashes happening right now? So thinking about like what are some systemic action we could take in the city too. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, looking at this list, I mean, this definitely covers, our high capacity, for lack of a better term, like boulevard streets that have curbs and maybe bike lanes. They're multi-lane. A lot of them have traffic signals. But kind of piggybacking on Mike's comment, seeing what I don't see on this are kind of our collector streets that are maybe overserved, if in a way, like Release Station, Release Valley, St. Mary's, Glenside. These streets certain times of day carry a ton of traffic, but they generally don't have curbs. They're going to be trickier to tackle for sure. But I want to make sure that that's not lost in it, that there are a lot of streets in the city that carry a significant amount of traffic that, might not look it. They look a little more rural, but people are still crossing them and using them for various purposes.
Jennifer?
I'm surprised to see for Pleasant Hill Road it be from Old Tunnel to Olympic. If anything, I would suggest, because we're taking up the most traffic part of it, which is the Pleasant Hill Road 24. I would take it up to Release Valley Road, because Release Valley Road, if we're going south in the morning, that's where the traffic is coming from, and that is where the my understanding that most of the accidents have happened along that path. So I would recommend taking it up to Release Valley Road.
Yep, we're noting that. Thank you. Greg?
Thanks. Well, I concur with both Councilmember Kendall on including School Street and Jen Paul on extending Pleasant Hill. And then the only other comment I had, I don't know if it's possible to do it, but given that our city council has approved, significant expenditures for quick build projects around our schools, if it makes sense to consider, a general near school location for, each of the Lafayette schools to be included in the priority locations.
Yeah, so I will touch base on that a little bit later, because we also are working on the Safe Route to School project with Lafayette. So we're thinking about that, especially when we think about the field work portion and going out and doing some of the site visits. So we do have the list of short, medium term recommendations around all 7 public schools within Lafayette. And that's something we will definitely kind of fold in when we start thinking about the action the safety actions and what are some of the recommendations. But that's a really good point.
Thanks.
Yeah. And Colin?
Sure. So looking at the 10 years of analysis, 2008 through 2017, of Switter's collision data that Fair and Peers analyzed for CCTA for its countywide Vision Zero effort, I would show, Olympic Boulevard from Reliance Station Road is also shown. The Oak Hill Road segment and Happy Valley Road segment southward of Deer Hill Road, but also including a couple hundred feet north of Deer Hill Road. Those are other locations to consider based on that data set and that analysis.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
And Colin, I think we have that information that you sent, the Fair and Pierce data, correct?
You should, yeah. And if not, let me know.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. And Katie?
I agree with Colin's inclusion of those two pieces, but we mentioned this before, I think in the prior meeting, that the upcoming structures that are being built and the numerous residences that are coming online at Dolores and Mount Diablo and that offset intersection, it's already a little tricky, mostly for cars, not always for pedestrians, but it will get more so.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I like this very specific location point out, so thank you for that. Emily?
This is somewhat related to Greg's comment, and it's also a question related to the Safer Streets model. So I'm wondering if that model takes into account the higher risk of vulnerable roadway users, such as children or seniors, or somehow weight the risk of locations where vulnerable users are known to travel, such as around schools or senior centers.
So I don't believe the model does, but I have to double check that. I know the model looks at vulnerable user in the sense of pedestrian and bicyclists, but I don't think it goes into the detail of children and age group. So I don't think so, but I'll double check and confirm that.
Thank you.
And Colin?
Based on the comment that was made about potential, school or educational land use locations, the 10 years of analysis that came up with 10 or 12 top countywide common collision patterns also included seniors and people with disabilities, people over the age of 65, I believe, in addition to other patterns. So that's another factor for potential consideration in addition to schools. And youth was definitely one of the top 10 common countywide collisions as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know that also kind of looks at like that's kind of calling like seniors, youth, and kind of grouping as what I would call like emphasis area for CCTA. So I think when we think about that, I definitely would kind of think about that a little bit more. So yeah, thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? Chris?
Yeah, one thing that I think would be helpful, I like the map where it breaks out, especially with the pedestrians, of bike crashes and the pedestrian crashes. But I think that one thing that could be beneficial to evaluate a little further is to identify, where these crashes are occurring with either pedestrian or bicycles. Where are they in relation to either bike paths or walking paths? And is it a scenario that maybe we're directing people down a path, but then they're crossing at maybe an unsafe location? And is there a different way to reroute around that location? I participated in a similar study with the city of Pleasant Hill and requested the same thing, that I think that we need, if we're going to evaluate the number of bike and pedestrian collisions, is the current either bike paths or walking paths that we are directing people down, Is it associated with intersections, and are they on these paths, but just they're crossing at dangerous locations? And does an improvement need to be made at specific intersections from those paths? Or is it not even associated? Maybe could a path be added to that area to reduce these collisions where they're occurring, or as identified in the bike area, that it's a medium density or a high density location? Is it because maybe bike paths don't exist in those areas and they're biking actually out in traffic?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm hoping also from people's experience in this group that there are some location that like pops up in your head just based off what Chris is saying. You're like, yes, there's that street or that road that I crossed that really stands out. So Mark?
Well, the one that I think screams at me looking at these maps, we look at Olympic or we look at Moraga Boulevard, not to be confused with road. The Lafayette Moraga Trail doesn't get you all the way downtown, and it certainly doesn't get you to Walnut Creek, but it's attractive enough, that Stanley students use it to get to school. Folks use it to walk downtown. So I like that this is highlighted here. I think it's crucial. And obviously we can only do what's in city limits, but curious if other locations pop out to folks.
Yeah. I don't see any hands up, but I know, Colin, you had your hand up before.
Yeah, sorry, too many things, trying to do too many things at once. Mr. Bachman's comments, want to reiterate those. And in terms of one of the common countywide collision patterns, unprotected trail crossings was one of them. And I guess to make a comment I had intended on making at the very beginning, there was, I think it was goal 5 that was being revised to say create a plan for safer, I think it said safer streets for all. I just want to point out for consideration and maybe even discussion that the tagline or the motto, if you will, that CCTA put beneath its Countywide Vision Zero logo is safe travel for all. And the reason for that was in particular to be inclusive of trails and not just focusing on the safety of streets.
Yeah, thank you. And Patrick?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment as someone that receives a lot of the emails that come in from residents making requests about for the engineering department to address safety. The vast majority of emails and calls that I get are on local streets, which is interesting, and it'll be great to get the results of the survey to see if that tracks. But on the map that we're looking at now, one intersection that does pop up is the intersection between Mount Diablo and Moraga Road. And I know Mike has done a lot of work there to try to make conditions safer for pedestrians, but it still lights up in terms of stories about feeling unsafe at a location.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I think to once we get the community comments to kind of overlay that with what we're seeing based off the crash analysis to see if it's similar in these boulevards, or I would like to see if the local and more residential roads, what are the ones that people mentioned that have near miss and just from their experience feel unsafe, and so this is really helpful, and I think because Lafayette, which is a great thing, has typically lower crash data or on local roads, we're definitely leaning really heavily on the task force and then also community feedback on refining this priority list that we have. Do we have any questions or comments? And then moving forward, I want to talk about the upcoming field visit we are thinking about. And then the field visit would be building off the priority list that I just shared, along with kind of taking the feedback that we got from the task force. And the goal of the field visit is to go out and take measurements and see what type of action is feasible, review the crash data to make sure we're looking at the right location with the right risk factors, and see how vehicles or different modes are operating in the field, and really getting that qualitative element that's missing from the data analysis for this. And the field visit will also be building off what we have done for the Safe Route to School projects, where we visit all 7 public schools throughout the city. And here is just a map of some of the proposed improvements we have developed near the public schools. So we're definitely be building off of this effort for the local road safety plan. Do we have any other questions? Yep, Jennifer?
Yeah. Will the field visits come before or after the survey from residents is completed?
We haven't scheduled a date for the field visit yet, so we're still trying to pick a date and refine that date. But I think ideally it would come before and after the survey, but I think we're still in the phase of discussing that. Right?
Jennifer, did you have a recommendation on that?
No, I think, if there could be 2, like was just discussed, before and after, I think perhaps there's, and also I guess the question is if it's who it's including, because as we know from the school field visits, while I think it's wonderful to include everyone, there's also, I think there's parameters. Perhaps we do include everyone in one of them, and we are able to just kind of smaller to walk around to really work with the consultants to look at things. No, it was honestly more of a question. I'm not sure the best way to go about doing it.
Yeah. Thank you. And Greg?
Hi, this is probably a question more for Patrick. I just wanted to make sure, because I didn't see it on the agenda, but that there was going to be public comment on these priority areas as well.
There is going to be public comment, yes.
Okay, thanks.
And Colin?
It's always tricky using the term priority, so I just wanted to kind of ask, is the term priority locations being used in the sense of developing projects or funding projects, or any other potential criteria?
They are being used just kind of allowing us to talk about the next task, or the next line item for us is to develop location profiles. So we're using, well, at least I'm using the term priority location just as a formality to kind of talk about the location profile, and then what we're going out for the field visit. I agree with you. Maybe the priority portion could be a little touchy, so we don't have to use the term priority. But do you have a recommendation on what you would suggest in following like what CCTA uses?
Not necessarily. Yeah, and I wasn't necessarily suggesting that, but just kind of being clear in the formal report as it continues to be, evolving in terms of how we are using the term priority so that, the public can better understand, what's being proposed.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? And if we don't, I'm going to pass it on to Lauren to talk about the upcoming public engagement activities.
Thanks, Diane. Next slide, please. So the web map is now live and open until November 20th, and that is the link right there. So yeah, please fill it out, pass it on to folks. Definitely want as much feedback as we can get. Pop-up table at the Trick or Treat event on Friday on Mount Diablo Boulevard. And then we are still figuring out when we want to have our virtual public meeting. It'll likely be November 16th or 17th. And we thought 6 p.m. was kind of a time where we could hopefully accommodate the most amount of people, not being too late, not being too early. Patrick.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the web map, which just launched yesterday and looks great. I'm working with Suzanne Ayarla, our communication analyst, and we're preparing email blurbs and flyers that we want to get out. And so I would like to follow up after today's meeting to send each of you on the task force with some email descriptions and a copy of the flyer. And if you could get out the word as well, we would appreciate it. We're going to be going out to schools, PTAs to get the word out. We're going to go to some of the senior centers, flyers at the library. Again, we're going to be at the Trick or Treat event this week, the weekly roundup, our social media. And so would love to have the help of you all to help get the word out as well.
Thanks, Patrick. Colin?
I guess in terms of the November 16th date, for what it's worth, that's a Contra Costa Transportation Authority board meeting at 6 p.m. And Mayor Teresa Geringer is on the CCTA. She is a commissioner.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
Susan?
And then another, unfortunately, now conflict on the Thursday, the 17th, is our DEIB group is having a big public forum for renters that live in our city.
Okay.
So there's a conflict on both nights.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions? Looks like no.
And then looks like we're probably going to end this meeting shorter than the first task force meeting. So I want to kind of go through the next steps.
And we do have public comment as well. So
okay.
Just want to remind you, yeah.
Sorry, but I still want to go through the next steps.
Go ahead.
So we will be sending a follow-up email with the materials discussed, and then for the third task force meeting, we know trying to find a best time and date that works for everyone. So I have a poll here that I think will be great for everyone to fill out to get that date and time, especially as we're inching closer to the holiday season in mid-December for the third task force meeting. And I have a when to meet link here for everyone to fill out. So it's a fairly simple tool to use that I will share right now. Does everyone see my screen on the when to meet?
Will you email that out to all of us as well?
Yes.
Yeah, we will email it. But I just kind of want to show everyone how to use it really quickly. So I'll fill out my availability. You just put in your name. You don't have to put in a password. And then I like this tool in the sense that you could select the date and time that works for you. So kind of go in and select all the time and date that works for you, and that's it. And then this will kind of allow us to plan and schedule the third task force meeting that works the best for everyone. And then we did focus a good amount of time today talking about the priority location and location profile. So that is going to be the focus on our third task force meeting, those key locations within Lafayette that we'll be looking at. And then also the part I'm excited about is the emphasis area, and then building off the safety action toolbox and that will be building off of what CCTA has put together for their toolbox as part of designing for safer travel for people walking and biking. So that will be the main focus of our third task force meeting. And just a reminder for everyone to get the word out about the web map survey here too. So everything will be sent out, and a link to the survey and the web map will be shared. And I would like to thank you all for letting me present today. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me or any comments. And then I'll hand it back to Patrick if there's
no other comments. I would like to open it up to members of the public to provide comment on anything that we've discussed today, the goals and objectives, the priority locations, anything that was discussed. Stella.
Yeah, thank you. I wonder if maybe if the slide deck could be taken down so I can see.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
More than just Patrick and Diane. No.
There
okay,
you go.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm Stella Weatherspoon. I'm a commissioner on TransCirc, but I'm an alternate. So I'm speaking just as a member of the public right now. I wanted to thank you so much for the data analysis and for going through your findings. It's really, really very, very interesting to see what's happening out there. I noticed in the report that there's a description of the study limitations, and I'm wondering what can be done to mitigate some of those and make the analysis more robust. Ideally, the data set would have more incidents, and these data should be normalized by volumes, by mode volumes. I understand we don't have traffic volumes by mode within the city, but the study could look at the total SWITRS data set, which I think goes from 2011 to 2021. And that would contain, I think, around 126 Lafayette incidents as I queried the database this afternoon, which would be significantly more than 47. So just want to throw that out there as something to consider, because I'm really just not confident that the 5-year window will be really representative of the patterns within the city. We may be missing something is my thought. Another limitation that I see in the analysis is kind of a unique characteristic of Lafayette, which is just our topography. We're not a grid city. We're not a level city. We're very, very transportation network challenged. And a lot of our roads are not, they're not level, and they have varying grades. We have a lot of curved roads, blind corners, hidden driveways, no shoulders, small shoulders. We have open ditch drainage next to some of these roads. And I'm sure that many of these characteristics increase the likelihood of crashes. And so ideally, they should be factors in the analysis. I mean, I know we probably don't have that data digitized in a way that it could be easily analyzed, but I guess maybe the opportunity is for the task force and the public to bring that background data into the picture by thinking about those particular types of streets where they feel unsafe. And then the last thing I just wanted to ask about, clarify, there is the sliding window bike crash and bike crash density figure in the report. And it shows Pleasant Hill Road as having, I think, a medium or medium high density, but it doesn't have any dots for actual crashes. So it looks like an error in the map to me, either in that it's not showing some bike crashes or that it's showing a medium to high density when there are no bike crashes. So maybe that's something Tool could look at and clarify later. Thank you very much. Appreciate all the work.
Yeah. Sorry, let me, sorry,
okay.
Yeah, go Susan.
So what was the time window that you found the 126 incidents?
Oh, so the Switters database is available on the UC Berkeley website, and the start date for the data is 2011, and it goes through 2021. 2021 is provisional, so they say it may change. Sure. But when I looked at the total query set, it includes State Route 24, subtracting out State Route 24, came up with 126, for what that's worth.
No, that's very interesting, because I was looking at it too, and I'm like, wait, we had a fatality at Stanley and Pleasant Hill Road. Oh, wait, we had a fatality at Spring Hill Road, wait. And that was why they weren't there, because it was before 2017. And I think Stella may be right that we probably should go back a little farther. Our roads haven't changed that much, right? And so
yeah, roads haven't changed. Our population hasn't changed.
Hasn't changed, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I could kind of address that, why we end up choosing the 5-year time period. So it's the nature of this local road safety plan, which it's a requirement for cities to develop a local road safety plan to get federal funding as part of the HESIP funding. So 5-year is just the time range that is more common for cities to look at for a local road safety plan. And that's why we looked at 5 years of data. So to kind of explain why we chose 5 years. And then I love how you kind of started asking a question, Stella, and then answered it by saying, by starting your question as, the roads in Lafayette is unique, and there's windy roads and grades, and part of the goal of the task force and then the community engagement is to also point out these unique characteristics of Lafayette that, we don't have data for, and we can't kind of lay on top the crash information, but I'm really hoping what we have discussed today, and then also with the community engagement portion where people are kind of giving us their feedback on roads that feels unsafe, that we are able to kind of identify and kind of account for those characteristics on the roads in Lafayette. And in addition, I think the field visit that we will be conducting, visiting at these like priority or these main locations or high level locations, that we would be able to kind of see these trends and kind of, I guess, characteristics that relates to each other that leads to causation of crashes.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else in the public would like to make a comment? I am not seeing any hands raised. Oh, no, Jay Ellis.
I will promote.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Jenny. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I'll try to promote to panelists here.
Okay.
Hi, it's Jeannie Ellis. Can you guys see me and hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you for this. I found this meeting very interesting. I had a couple of questions. I was actually really curious on the predictive and the historical maps. So I know that there was some conversations around some of the predictive maps not being backed by necessarily some of the data on the historical maps, but I'm actually also curious on the opposite, which is I think I saw, like in particular, First Street had indications of a variety of collisions as an example, but I know that there's there already is a combination bike and pedestrian pathway there, and so I am really curious. And it wasn't indicated as part of the predictive map in terms of an investment area or priority area. So I was curious, like, how do you interpret where you actually are seeing accidents, but there is something already there that is intended to be, providing safety for bikers and pedestrians. And I don't know, maybe, and by the way, I'm relatively new to Lafayette, so maybe that bike and pedestrian path got put in recently, but I was just kind of curious how you interpret some of that data.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think part of the data that's a caveat we have with kind of the crash analysis portion is that if there's an improvement that has been put in to kind of target the crash risk at that location, the crash analysis will still show up the historical crash at that location. So I think that's where the job beyond the crash analysis really comes in for this portion and for that intersection you're talking about.
Well, and maybe can I ask, does anyone know when that bike and pedestrian pathway got put in place? Like, Mike, maybe you know.
like 15 years, like 18 years ago. I mean,
okay,
but the other thing is, First Street may have been tripped because it might have been First Street up at Mount Diablo or First Street near 24. So I have found a couple things just looking at the reports where maybe the accident isn't exactly where it said, or maybe it's not pinpointed exactly right on a map or something. So there'll be some proofing in that regard.
Okay, and the reason why I'm curious about that is because obviously, we want to make sure that, to the point around how do we make sure that the investments really are going to be helping to safeguard and prevent collisions, and, to the extent if there are areas where we've made these investments already, but we're still seeing collisions, I'm just really curious around what that means. Like, does that mean that was not effective, or does that mean that there's other factors in place that are going into that, that are still creating opportunities where there's still collisions? And I have another question, and then that's my only question, which is, how are you going to ensure that the community feedback that you're receiving in the survey is unbiased and is going to be backed by sort of valid data and is not going to be anecdotal in nature?
That's a great question. I think part of it is kind of reviewing the community feedback, but the community feedback will be an overlay on the crash analysis. So I think when we kind of talk about community feedback, it's not solely just kind of taking the community feedback, but it's also kind of looking at the community feedback and then looking at the roadway types and the characteristics to kind of, I guess, make gut check that we're also seeing what they're seeing in terms of engineering treatments or other type of action that's available for certain location that is flagged by the community.
Okay, so there will be some extra work to take that the community feedback and apply other valid data.
Yeah, so we will be reviewing all the community feedback that we get.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for this. This is really interesting.
I know. Thank you for your questions.
Unmute myself. Next hand I see is Claudia Cohen.
I promoted Claudia to panelist, and I'll start the timer.
Jenny, you don't need to use the timer. It's okay.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, thank you very much for all of this information. I don't know, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I have a couple questions, or one question and a couple comments. My understanding was that the school district was getting involved in the task force or on the task force. Is that not happening?
Yes, there's 2 school districts are involved, and it appears that neither of them were present today.
Okay, I didn't recall them present at the other one, but I ask because so I live in Burton Valley, and you know, I've said this before, so sorry if it's repetitive for some people, but about, I don't know, 600, 700 students attend Burton Valley. About 80% of them do not live in biking or walking distance, like more than a few miles away. So twice a day, if they're not taking the school bus, twice a day, for example, from Saranac, parents are driving them up to Burton Valley and then picking them back up. And that's not going to be something, I assume, that is going to show up on these maps, because, you know, it's sort of random. It doesn't happen in the summer. It doesn't happen on holidays. Yet, you know, there's no way a kindergartner is going to bike from Saranac up to Burton Valley. And then I also know that because of crowding here in Burton Valley, some kids from Burton Valley are going to Lafayette Elementary. So you would remove a lot of the cars on the road in the mornings and the afternoons if kids were slotted somewhat differently. So is that, or if there was a different type of transportation, because it takes like an hour to get from Saranac to Burton Valley Elementary. So at some point, will there be other transportation factors considered? Because it's great to have more bikeways, safer bikeways, more means to travel, but if people live too far away, or if there's reasons that they can't, like there's no bus going from Burton Valley to Stanley Middle School in the mornings, so kids either bike or have to be driven, then, I mean, you can build all the safe trails you want, and they're not going to be used because you haven't like addressed part of the actual problem. So I was just wondering if and when some of that would be addressed. And my hope had been that if the school district was involved, that this could be sort of discussed. That was my only comment.
So Diane, you might have a comment, but just an initial thought is I think what you're talking about is congestion rather than safety. And so this effort is specific to safety. And so if there are no collisions on the streets in Burton Valley, then no, that community will not light up on the maps that Diane has presented. Now, community members may want to identify some safety issues on the survey and part of the outreach that we're doing and we talked about, but this would not be a safe route to school effort. With that said, that is something separate that I would like to initiate in the city, but this is not a congestion relief program. This is a safety program. And so Diane, feel free to.
Okay, because you have people saying they're feeling safe with all the cars here, so, and get out and walk or get out and bike, but you know, more than half the kids in Burton Valley can't get out and walk and can't get out and bike. So then that goes back to the feeling of lack of safety.
Yeah, I kind of feel you. I think Patrick, I think you made a good point about the web map that we have out, and I think to address like comments like that are not showing up in the crash analysis, I think the web map to get people's feedback and getting the community's feedback will be crucial to highlight these areas that we don't see from the crash analysis. So I really encourage everyone here to kind of share that map out and get community feedback on that.
Okay, thank you.
And Carson, did you want to address Claudia's comment? Your hand was raised.
Yeah, I have to say I think congestion is a safety factor. We've done a lot of surveys at schools, and a lot of reasons that people cite for not letting their kids walk and bike is because of the congestion and the high number of cars, and they don't want their kids to mix with that. So it's sort of a catch-22. If there were fewer cars, more kids would walk. So I wouldn't dismiss congestion as not being a safety factor. I don't think that's true.
Thank you.
Oh, I think Patrick, you're on mute.
Yeah, I keep doing that. Are there any other public comments? I don't see any other hands. Okay. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is task force member report. So this would be consideration of matters a task force member wishes to initiate for placement on a future agenda. Is there anything anyone would like to add to a future agenda? All right, not seeing any hands. The next item is adjournment of the meeting. So I want to thank everyone for their time. This was a great discussion. And thank you, Diane and Lauren. We really appreciate all the effort you put in. So look for a follow-up email from myself and the information, including the slide deck, information about the web map, and then the survey for the next task force meeting. We appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.